Hey, I'd like to call this board meeting of the Utah League of Cities and Towns to order. It's Monday, December 12th, 2022, and it's about 9:35 a.m. So welcome, everybody. And I guess this is our last meeting of the year. And I guess, is it our last meeting before the session starts?
Yes.
Yeah,
technically.
Yeah. So because of that, we're going to be talking about some things today that the officers may need to deal with, because there are still a lot of balls in the air. We don't have draft bills on a number of things that are key to our interest, and we will be getting those presumably after today or something like that. So anyway, let's do introductions around the table here first, and then we'll probably just ask Nick to do the people online. It'll be quicker. So Isaac, do you want to start?
Isaac Axman, Deputy Mayor Provo.
Kate Bradshaw, Bountiful City Council.
Justin Lee, League of Cities and Towns.
Name Drill, League of Cities and Towns.
Cameron Deal with the League.
Jeff Silvestrini, Mayor Mill Creek and President of the League.
Mark Shepard, Mayor Cookville City.
Tammy Tran, Cookville City Mayor.
Nick Jarvis with the League.
Jeff Miles with HPME, Auditor for the League.
Gary Hill, Bountiful City.
Rich Gutierrez, the League.
Carson Eilers, League Staff.
Angela Adams, League. Edie Harley with the League.
Miguel, Internet the League.
But not for much longer.
Yeah. Job is sad.
That's sad.
We will miss them. Those are very.
Somebody said that to me. I feel terrible.
All right, and then online we have Roger Tu, Perry Malkovich, Jackie Nostrom, Holly Gaines, Troy Walker, Brett Hales, Mary Winch, Sean Guzman, Jessica Egbert, Mark Johnson, Meg Ryan, Gary Watcott, Molly Wheeler, Todd Godfrey, Scott Phillips, and Don Ramsey.
And we have Mayor Dirk Burton from West Jordan, who joined us here live and in person. So
I came in after the introduction, so that way.
you're always trying to be anonymous, but it doesn't work.
I'm really shy.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending today on a snowy day. And let's hope we keep getting more, even though it may be inconvenient for us down here, but it sure feels good to get moisture in the mountains. So we have our minutes from our November 14 meeting to consider. And then we also just ask, well, let's look at the minutes first. Does anybody have any comments or corrections to the minutes? If not, I'll look for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Mayor Shepard and Councilmember Bradshaw moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those are approved. Thank you. And I'll just remind you, if anyone has a conflict that they'd like to declare, this is the time to do that. And if I invite you to fill out one of our conflict of interest forms if you believe you need to do that. So, all right. I guess next order is number 3. Lynn, do you want to talk about boards and commissions?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so this will be really fast, but we have a few vacancies for our boards and commissions that we would love to fill sooner rather than later. The few that we have, the first one is the Utah Indigent Defense Commission. I brought this up at the last board meeting as well, but we're just looking for preferably a city attorney to fill that role. Ryan Luce is also on that board, so if you have any questions there, he'd be a good contact. Then the Utah Communications Authority, John Park was serving on that, so we have that opening. And the other person we have on that is Gary Watcott. And then the Outdoor Adventure Commission, our joint appointment with UAC is still open. So we're going to get some names and then go back to UAC and hopefully figure something out. So if you are interested in any of those 3, or if you know someone that's interested, if you could let me know, that would be awesome. And we'll get going on that.
Okay, thanks, Liam.
Yep.
And I will note that it isn't official yet, but I think I can indicate that the nominating committee for the Wasatch Front Regional Council has elected to nominate Mayor Ramsey to be second or be the vice president of WFRC for this coming year. So she currently holds a seat on the regional council that's appointed by this body. So in January, we'll need to appoint someone to replace her to represent the league on WFRC's regional council. So, all right, then.
Mayor, I didn't know you were going to mention that.
Well, congratulations, Mayor.
Thank you.
I know you'll do a great job as it'll be 2 years before she according to the way that things normally work before she's chair, but she'll have all the duties of vice chair next year. So, all right,
Actually, Jeff, I become chair in January.
oh, that's right. I'm sorry. It's chair because Commissioner Scott from Black Sauter County is no longer going to be in office. So
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. And sorry to not be there in person, but it's great to see all of you.
yeah, we can't see you, but that's fair. I'm glad you didn't have to drive in through the snow anyway. Okay, next up, the most exciting thing on our agenda today is the presentation of our audited financial statements. Jeff Miles would like to present this to us, so sure. Hope we can stand the excitement.
Yes, I'm coming on pins and needles when the accountant starts speaking. So it's a pleasure to be with you today. This is our firm's first year auditing League of Cities and Towns. And so I can just get right into the report. Nate, I don't know if you have it, we already have it up. So on page 1 of the report, you'll actually find our opinion on the financial statements. It says we have audited the financial statements of the business type activities of the Utah League of Cities and Towns for the year ended June 30th, 2022, and the related notes to the financial statements, which collectively comprise the league's basic financial statements. In our opinion, the accompanying financial statements present fairly in all material respects the respective financial position of the business type activities of the Utah League of Cities and Towns as of June 30th, 2022. So we are issuing a clean opinion on the financial statements of the league. And maybe I'll just do a couple brief financial highlights from the financial statements. So maybe trying to go to page 5, probably 7 PDF. So here's kind of a 3-year balance sheet of the league. You will notice that the assets of the league are increasing, but fortunately most of that is just due to a net pension asset related to the retirement plan. As you can see, it's $2.9 million, which essentially means that the league is very well funded on the retirement plan, being most of the employees are in the contributory plan, and with the investment returns that were experienced from the midpoint of 2020 to 2021, most contributory plans are, you could say, overfunded at this point, but that's going to swing back the other way next year because we've had a stock market loss of about 20% during calendar year 2022. And the impact of that is if you go down one more page, you'll see the payroll and related benefits expense for the year was only $303,000 because we actually recorded pension revenue of $1 million during fiscal year 2022. And so when you see that change in that position, like, oh, hey, we made $824,000 during the year, but $1 million of that is related to pension activity, which we can't really budget for at the league. And so if you take away that $1 million that pension adjustment, really you have a change, you have a loss in net position of $175,000 for the year, which I think is probably a more reasonable way to look at it. And I think the impact of that, I wouldn't say there was a loss. I just think with the league reopening and having conventions and those sorts of things, we kind of had some stored up revenues that we then had as expenses for the conventions that took place during fiscal year 2022.
We budgeted a use of our reserves in there. So if you look at the budget that's in here, you'll see there was a negative amount budgeted at the end of that.
Yeah. So it kind of had some money held over with COVID that was then spent in the fiscal year of 2022. But overall, I think, the idea of the league isn't to build up this huge net position. It really is just to be able to continue offering services to the member cities and towns. And so I think that's the emphasis. It's like, hey, it looks like a great year, but most of that was just a paper entry related to the pension plan, and that's going to reverse back next year's financial statements just because of what's going on in the stock market. But overall, we feel like the accounting is handled well, using Dave Sanderson, the third-party accountant that doesn't have any access to the assets, but reconciles everything for the league is, I think for us, that's viewed as a plus, somebody that's coming in monthly and helping with financial statements, but isn't involved in the day-to-day operations. But overall, I feel the league has good controls. It's a small operation here, so you don't want to spend more than you need to for accounting function, but we feel like the league has adequate controls despite having, not as much staff as a city would have. So no findings in that regard. We did have one kind of minor journal entry related to deferred revenue. I think it was more kind of a product of what was reported last year, just kind of like just flowing that all through and getting it right where it needed to be at the end of the fiscal year. But no major issues that we think that needs to be highlighted to the board. I think at the end of the report, the last 4 pages here are our reports on compliance. Page 31, 33 of the PDF. Every government audit we do, we're required to gain an understanding of the internal controls. We don't give an opinion on them, but we do identify that we didn't identify any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in the controls of the league. And then 2 pages down is our compliance with the state compliance audit guide. And we looked at budgetary compliance, the fraud risk assessment, public treasury bond, fund balance, and Utah retirement systems. And we didn't identify any findings within any of those areas. And then this is a follow-up. There was a finding in the prior year that was related to sponsorship revenue and how that was recorded. And we feel like the league corrected that during fiscal year 2022 and had no additional findings. So with that, I guess, any questions from board members?
I just want to indicate there are some cities that do have a smaller staff than the league does.
That is true. So, but we thought with the staff and the size of the league, we feel like it's proper and appropriate.
So the staff is probably right-sized for the work that the league has to do to represent all cities, big and small.
No, the staff will just do more work.
Sure. Then, but I just want to say that thanks to that staff, because it's great to get clean audits like this, and what we all want to see. And so kudos to you guys for doing that. And thank you, Jeff, for the report. Okay. All right. Thank you. Then let's talk about the boring stuff now, the advocacy and engagement update. So I'm going to turn this over to Cameron to lead off on this meeting.
We need to approve it though, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Okay. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the audited financial statements for fiscal year 2022.
Motion to approve. This was.
Okay. Thank you.
Second that.
Yeah, Tanya seconded. Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's approved. Thank you. Now you can go.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you everyone for being here in person and remotely for the final board meeting of 2022. Here's what we hope to accomplish. Really is a combination of items 5 and 6. First, we want to update everyone and make sure we're all on the same page about the UEOC and the Commission on Housing Affordability and where we're at and what the next steps are there. Second, with the release of the governor's budget on Friday, we sent out hot off the presses information to you. And since that time, we as staff have continued to pour over the document and have some recommendations for you, as well as items to discuss. And then third, it's in the executive director report, but we also need to start the conversation about membership dues, which is also tied into the strategic direction of the organization. We sent that update to us. Yeah. Before we get into those, I do just want to say thank you for the amount of time that you spend on behalf of the cities that you represent, as well as on behalf of the league. We do have a small token of appreciation and a Christmas gift for you that you may not have seen as you walked in, but those of you who are here will make sure you get it as you leave. And for those online, we'll make sure to mail it to you.
You'll get a virtual gift.
Yeah, virtual gift. Every time it gets cold and the first real snowstorm hits, my voice always starts to go. So I'm hoping it makes it through today, because in addition to this meeting, we have LPC, and then the officers will be meeting with the governor's senior staff this afternoon. So it is a very heavy advocacy day, and it's the last real scheduled advocacy day of this magnitude in December. Well, timing wise, as you see on the agenda, the Commission on Housing Affordability has called a meeting for December 27th. That is not a typo. That is legitimately their next meeting on December 27th. I've told several staffers they don't need to be there, but I will be there. Then the UEOC will next meet on January 11th. So this is the last time that this board is scheduled to meet before that UEOC meeting. Nick, I'm going to quickly send that to your Gmail so you can pull it up.
While Cam's doing that, I want to just raise something, or kind of inform and then ask a question about this. So throughout the year, and then more intensively during the legislative session, the officers of the league have been able to meet with the governor's staff and to talk about the governor's position on various things that we're concerned about. The original goal was to be kind of a kitchen cabinet where we would talk about policy and try to come up with informed policy that had input from cities and towns before it goes public. So the league officers all represent sizable communities at this point, and we actually have included Mayor Monson from Blanding in some of those meetings before, because I think it's important that we also have a rural perspective when we're talking to the governor's staff about these things. So I am going to propose that we continue to have Mayor Monson join us with those meetings. However, I recognize that he hasn't been, formally selected by either like the Small Cities Caucus or anything like that. So I really want to throw this out. I know that Mayor Monson and I talked about this morning. He's willing to continue to do that because I asked him if he would. And but both of us just want to make sure that everybody's comfortable with that. So what I'm going to kind of suggest is if board members represent smaller communities or the Small Cities Caucus, when next time it meets, would you guys please discuss and see if you're comfortable with Mayor Monson filling that role? Or obviously, if you want to select somebody else, do that. But I just think it's important to have somebody when we have these meetings with a small city rural focus.
How was Mayor Monson selected in the first place?
So he's a board member, so he was selected the same way as any board member. And really for us internally, it was a recognition that the 5 officers currently are between the Provo and Bountiful corridor. And so we were acknowledging that for a statewide organization, that would make sense to have an additional voice. And so this is not a constitutional position. This is really an experiment on our end to say, because the officers are congregated in that narrow geographic region, does it make sense to have somebody from the board who can be essentially a liaison outside of that corridor and realistically participate in some, if not most of these calls that we have with the governor's office during the session?
Well, I think it's a great idea because that shows how different cities are. If you get someone that's totally different side and a totally different area of the state.
Yeah, we don't have an officer from that, from Southwest, rural Utah. And I'll also say, Mayor Burton, that this is something that Mayor Monson raised with me and Cam, I guess, about, just making sure that constituency had representation when we're meeting with the governor's staff. So it really is an informal thing. And, but because we kind of have been doing it, I want to make sure everybody's okay with that.
I've actually used it for an example before when they've come up with legislation. I say, what we have in West Jordan is totally different than what I have in Monticello. And you can't use one. Right. So I think it's a great idea.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
And then Councilmember Phillips That's something, and then there was somebody else who chimed in.
Councilmember Egbert said, I appreciate the opportunity to have Mayor Monson participate. Councilmember Phillips said it's important to have a rural voice in those meetings. And Mayor Ramsey said, Mayor Monson has given great input from a rural perspective, which is critical in these discussions. I strongly support having him regularly represent rural Utah in these meetings with the governor's team.
Thanks, you guys. Okay, Cam.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Silvestrini. And Mayor Monson, I mentioned it a moment ago, but we'll be meeting with the governor's staff this afternoon at 3. And so Justin will send you the Zoom link if you're available. If you're not, we recognize it's short notice, but we'll have those meetings we'll be setting the schedule in that meeting today for January, February, and early March. Okay, let's jump into the UEOC and the CHOP. So Justin and I actually received an email this morning from Legislative Research, and it confirms what Senator Fillmore told us last week, which is the CHOP bills, plural, are still being drafted. So unfortunately, we don't have a specific update of what is or what is not in the bill. I think it's important, though, for everyone to be on the same page of what we're still hearing from key state leaders. So Nick, will you pull up that PowerPoint? Even at the governor's budget announcement last Friday in South Jordan, the governor made some comments that were quoted in the Desert News. So first he said, you can see it on the left side of that screen. At least I couldn't until you covered it.
What are you looking for? Sorry.
Don't try it.
They give better. There we go. Yeah. So Governor Cox was asked about housing affordability, and he said, government is skewing the market. The market is telling us we need more housing, but it's holding that back, or was at least until we saw significant rate increases, is local governments. And then he referenced some local governments being in need of reform when it comes to things like permitting and zoning, and then also referenced potential changes to referendum processes. So that was Friday. Again, we've been meeting with the staff regularly and sharing with them data, sharing with the staff data about not just the number of permits, but the number of entitled units that, as of last report, was over 93,000 entitled units in our fast-growing cities. Additionally, Councilmember Egbert forwarded us an email last week that her representative, Representative White, who's the co-chair of the Commission on Housing Affordability, had sent to his constituents. Many of you probably received this email because the House, at least the House Republicans, I don't know about the House Democrats, but the House Republicans have sent this survey to residents. And Councilmember Egbert, this is quoted word for word from your email, but local housing and zoning policies should do more to support increasing the supply of housing in order to reduce housing prices. So inevitably, House Republicans will have a data point from their constituents on this question. What that data point is, don't know, but wanted people to be aware of that. Meanwhile, Councilmember, go ahead.
Representative White said he did forward my feedback to the group that is looking at the data. So who knows if we'll get a disclaimer that this is a bad data point, but we tried.
Excellent. Right, exactly. Then just in the last month, I've bulleted 3 different conversations. So these are 3 different key legislators who have said these statements to me personally. First, 75% of cities are planning well, but we need to do something about the other 25%. When I asked who the 25% were, this legislator actually did give me some names, to which I responded, did you know about a couple of those cities? And he was surprised. Nevertheless, that's very much his stance. It also dovetails in a term I heard from someone else. Every city should have a percentage of small lots. And then the third, if a city isn't following state law, that's when the legislature should step in. That third quote actually came from a legislator who is normally a champion for local control, and even prefaced his statement by saying, I support local control, but in this circumstance, this is where I think it's appropriate for the state to step in. So I wanted to frame the conversation we're having here with these points so that you know what we're hearing, because we are in a bit of a holding pattern with Senator Fillmore and Representative White, but there's still the possibility that leadership goes in a different direction anyway and runs their own bill And Mayor Silvestrini and I have meetings scheduled with the House Speaker and his staff in early January, and we're trying to have arrange a similar meeting with the Senate President before the session begins. So before we leave this slide, any thoughts or any questions or context anybody wants to bring up?
Yes.
I don't even want to copy my.
Well, for context, we've talked about this before, but one of the milestones I think that we were successful in collaborating with last session is the passage of House Bill 462, which required cities of over 5,000 population with certain qualifications to basically incorporate choices about moderate income housing proposals, and to also indicate how they were to amend their general plans to incorporate them, and to also identify a timeline and process to get from point A to point B. We have a number of cities that, too big of a number of cities that did not comply with House Bill 462, according to what Workforce Services says in evaluating what was submitted.
Can I stop you there? There were 9.
Huh?
I think there were 9.
No,
We were late, but we could fight.
Yeah.
Well, let me finish. There were a lot more than 9.
Well,
Okay.
there were initially a lot more, but there.
Yeah, that's it. People are working to get into compliance, and some of the things are relatively minor, but we just need to make sure we get as many as we can in compliance before the cure period expires in February?
in early February.
And because we're going to have egg on our face if we go back in and argue about that 75% are doing well, but if we haven't complied. So, I mean, that's a drum I've been beating, but we need to work on that.
So Gary put together a call with the Utah City Managers Association and DWS a couple of weeks ago to start working through these compliance challenges. Can you give us a quick update on how that went, and then I can fill in additional details?
Yeah, there was a lot of frustration with the cities because of the interpretation of the state about what they are saying is compliant and what is not. We learned they are giving no flexibility. They feel like they have no flexibility to give. For example, one of the things that I think many of you know is that we are all required to adopt in our general plans the exact wording from state code. If a single word is missing, they deem that as not being in compliance. I believe, and from our conversations, they're feeling a lot of pressure from the state legislature, from the governor's office, also from their own attorneys to strictly interpret that code. And so I think we learned one thing in that meeting, which is it won't do any good for us to fight the state DWS. We just need to work to come into compliance and then work on the legislation this year and our relationship with DWS to help them see the gray areas. That's something that I learned in that meeting. I would say that we need to be careful about our own message internally about cities not being in compliance or having submitted reports that were in compliance. I think many of us would say that we did what was asked of us and the interpretation was different than we expected and much more harsh. We're going to generate frustration with our own cities if we say we didn't turn in compliant reports. I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that DWS was overly bureaucratic. Nevertheless, that's the playing field, and I totally agree with Mayor Silvestrini that at this point it won't do us any good to fight that fight. We've just got to do what we can to come to compliance.
Well, let me just add one last thing here, and then I'll turn over to Mary Tran. Last week, Carson Eilers and Meg Ryan and our team took the feedback that we've heard from that city manager call, as well as the individual feedback as we followed up with cities. They spent 5 hours one day, basically going line by line through House Bill 462. Additionally, I've been working closely with WFRC and MAG on the station area plan piece of House Bill 462, because even as that implementation has gone on, there have been questions that have arisen. So at LPC today, we actually have a list, and we're still building it, but we have a list of here are the items that we're planning to seek amendments for on House Bill 462. Then we'll be presenting that to the broader group at LPC, both on the moderate income housing plan side, as well as the stationary plan side. We've been asked by the bill sponsors to have language to them by the end of the week so that Ledge Research can be working on it. Again, we've gotten a lot of feedback over the last few weeks, and today's really the last chance at LPC to say, is there anything else that we're missing based on the experience that cities have had? I'm also much more optimistic today than I was 3 weeks ago when we first got the overarching report from DWS, because of what Gary has outlined, that we've found that a lot of cities met the spirit of the law. They just now need to work through the technicalities, and I think some of those technicalities can be amended going forward. Mayor Tran?
Oh, I was just going to say, so, Kaysville was late initially getting it submitted, so we were updating our general plan, but our community development person did contact the agency directly and said, okay, this is my draft, how does it look? And then they gave her some tips and said, okay, tweak, and then she submitted it, and then it was accepted. So there is a little bit of conversation, I guess, and they're willing to kind of give us tips.
And to the credit of DWS, they did not have to do this, but they did it in part because of the partnership we've been trying to foster with them. They agreed to set aside 30 minutes for every city that was initially deemed non-compliant for the city staff to meet with DWS staff. And so it was essentially an entire week of meetings that DWS canceled on their other schedules to make time to meet with all the cities and counties that were initially deemed non-compliant to identify challenges. And then DWS has been feeding things back to us, and our city has been feeding things back to us. So the cure period ends in early February, which of course will be right in the middle of the session.
With the conversations with Shaw, with the governor's office, with others, specifically, what are they trying to get to? What's the outcome?
Yeah.
That I mean, if they had to define it, what is that final outcome that they're looking for? Because I don't think we're ever, not just with the 462, I don't think we're ever going to get there.
Yeah.
Because there is no defined, this is what we want, this is what we need. Because if I go to builders and I have on a regular basis and ask them, what would it take? Describe the house to me that you would have to build to be within that moderate income housing. They can't build it.
Mm-hmm.
That they just can't build it. It's not feasible. And so we can tweak our ordinances as much as we humanly possibly can, and it is never going to satisfy what the state is looking for because it can't be built. I mean, we built some townhomes this summer. 13 of them. Nothing, fancy by any means at all. And we're still almost $400,000. I mean, and it's a small set of townhomes. They're owner occupied, they're for sale. And it's just not, we looked at what would it take to get them into a 3 1/4 range. Mm-hmm. And it was impossible. These are 1,350 square foot townhomes.
Well, and that's the reality across the state. And you're spot on about those costs. So let me tell you how they've defined success to us, and then how we've tried to redefine success back to them. The way that Senate leadership has defined success to us is they want to see an increase in smaller lot, single family dwellings or townhomes that are available for first-time home buyers. That's what success looks like to them, is increasing that inventory. Okay, I agree with you about all the market challenges on that.
And I agree. I mean, I don't disagree with that at all.
Right.
I mean, that's the development that Clearfield has going right now with Destination, and they're 0 lot lines. They're 0 lot lines starting at $450,000. Right. These are not first-time home buyer homes that the state would define as first-time home buyer. And so I just worry that when we talk about, well, they're going to come after us for something else, they will, because we're never going to meet what they're looking for. And we can put all of that into play. And if every city said, yes, we're going to do the whole subdivision of 0 lot lines just to comply with state desires, we're still not there.
Yep, I agree.
And I jump down the realtors' throats because they're going to come at it hard this year. Mm-hmm. From their standpoint. They chair their legislative affairs committee next year. And so I have come down strong on this is not fixing an issue.
Yep.
This is, you can pitch this all you want, but small lot lines and, no impact fees does not change the price of the house.
Well, and the frustration that you're expressing here is the same frustration that we as staff have been hearing from the membership for the last few weeks, in part because we're at a standstill waiting to see what will actually be in the bill, right? And I agree with you, and I cannot emphasize enough to this group, and we'll say it again at LPC later. We know that there are those in the development side, realtor, home builder, whatever, that plan to have the most aggressive session ever at pursuing some of their policy priorities, almost regardless of what the outcomes would be of those policy priorities. And so the way we've tried to frame success, and to represent White's credit, he's actually adopted some of these in his core principles, and we hope that will be reflected in his bill, have been these three questions. Will the proposals result in good planning for growth? Will the proposals result in more housing units that are actually affordable to the buyer or renter? And do the proposals respect the traditional land use planning role of local government? So as we frame it that way, once the Fillmore White bill or bills come out, we as staff will analyze them according to these framing principles and then distribute it out to the membership, so that if the bill actually meets these standards, then maybe we've got something we can work with. If the bill comes back and does not meet these principles, then it's going to need to be an all hands on deck on behalf of local government to push back. Now, Nick, will you go to the next slide? What we already know, you've seen this for the last few months. Again, we're in a holding period, but you can see what we've tried to identify as the problem with the PRC proposal, our concerns with the PRC proposal, our counter proposal, and then our survey results, which now are 3 months old, because we've been in this waiting period for quite a while. So it may come back that the bill shows what we already know from LPC survey results, and we can say we're opposed for these reasons, or there may be other things in it, because again, there are a lot of moving parts. So that's why our plan is to analyze as soon as it comes out. We'll analyze the bill, distribute it to the membership, and get feedback specifically from the board to inform the officers, because the officers have a meeting with Justin and me scheduled for January 5th, which is the week before the UEOC. That way, we can gather all that input from the membership. The officers can strategize with Mayor Ramsey, and she's prepared on January 11th to cast her vote on whatever comes before the UEOC. Now, as we as staff have been thinking through what does success look like here, and those quotes that we shared a moment ago, the heart of our counter proposal is what this board endorsed in October, which is what we refer to as the systemic change around how we do subdivisions. We've also, at the October LPC, floated a concept that people said they were willing to live with, which was tightening the ripcord for non-compliant cities. Now, where this gets complicated is that the universe of non-compliance is still in flux right now. But let's assume that come February, the majority of cities are ultimately in compliance, because that's what I think will ultimately happen. So even using that 75-25 number that we heard from some key legislators, we are still trying to figure out a way to say to developers and the legislators, if you've got a city that is non-compliant and is not doing their part to plan for a variety of housing types, here's an additional consequence that currently doesn't exist in the law, but it would only apply to a small universe of communities. The ripcord is the option that we as staff have focused on internally because it already exists. And we do have examples, and I guess let me just define how the ripcord currently works. If a property owner has waited a reasonable period of time for a city to process a land use application and the city hasn't, then the property owner can pull a ripcord and it starts a 45-day shock clock. So that's existing law. It's been the law for a decade. But right now, when you get to day 46, there's no consequence. There's no defined outcome. It's just you have to make a decision as a city within 45 days. And we've been given examples, especially in the last year, of a growing number of local governments that are essentially ignoring that shot clock. So it gets to day 46 and they still aren't doing anything. Day 47, day 48, and the like. Todd Godfrey and I were on a call with a couple of folks last week, and one of them said that in his case, he's pulled the ripcord about 20 times this past year, and there were 5 different jurisdictions that just ignored it. The other 15 all complied, but 5 did not. So just left his client in limbo. So that's why we focused on this piece, is having a potential consequence at the end of that ripcord timeframe to have some sort of consequence. As we're going down the rabbit hole of the different things this could look like, are there any thoughts or concerns from the board in this space that you want to bring up, Councilmember?
Well, as I've been talking with people, on our former slide, we had 75% they were okay, 25% were not okay. It seems to me that although we're showing specific data that we have gathered on what we are doing and how we are progressing forward, excuse me, they are all going off of anecdotal stories. Their child didn't get something, or an extended family member, or somebody that's a close friend had a problem somewhere along the route, and that policy is getting shifted because some city staff member didn't do something on time or whatever. So I'm wondering, do we need to add anything to our message, because we are showing a lot of this data to them that shows that we are doing things that we're supposed to be doing. We're trying to be, our general plans are in compliance for the most part. We're all updating. We had those 100,000 building permits. We have this many entitled units. We have water issues, infrastructure issues, all of those things that have ripple effects, and yet it seems to just be going, and they come back to those anecdotal stories. So I'm just wondering, is there another message? Because I just feel like when we talk, we're just hitting kind of this wall that says, I'm listening, but this happened to my kid, or this happened to my neighbor, or whatever.
We've been trying to counter anecdotes with data all year, with limited success. For example, when we presented data to the governor's office, the staff was really excited about it, and we went into great detail with them. When I presented that same information to member of House leadership last month, he immediately dismissed it. So it's had mixed results. Unfortunately, like the example I gave with the ripcord, some anecdotes are based in accuracy. So if you've got a handful of cities that are ignoring the ripcord, and they're ignoring it because there is no real, there is a consequence, you can be sued. Like that's the consequence. But if they're ignoring one developer said something to me that same city is more or less validated to me, that the city basically said, yeah, we're going to ignore the ripcord, go ahead and sue us. And I just told the developer, go ahead and do it. This same city, we've seen their general plan, and this same city this same city is not only are they not meeting the spirit of, or the letter of the law of 462, but they're definitely not meeting the spirit of law of 462. And it's clear in their general plan, and it's clear in how they're currently zoning the city. In fact, just last year, the city actually downzoned the entire city. And then I had a council member email me and say, we don't allow anything in our city below 1/3 of an acre. Is the legislature going to make us change? So, right. So I'm just, like those that are not just coming, what I'm saying is true, but what I'm saying is that's conversations some of our own members are sharing with us directly. Okay. And that's why we're coming back to the board to say, in those circumstances, is there, one of our core strategic goals is to maximize our political capital at the Capitol. And if we find ourselves in a scenario where, Cameron City is engaging in the conduct that I just described, which we as staff have validated that there are a couple of cities that are doing this, then how much political capital do we expend on their behalf, even if it violates our core principles? Now, this is a very sticky conversation. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, Karsten put together a call with several other state leagues that are all facing crunches from their legislature on housing. And we asked that question to other state leagues, and several other state leagues are trying to figure this out too, and nobody had a good answer for us. We don't have to answer that today. We're simply putting it out there that It may be something we need to revisit at the January meeting, once we kind of the 462 process plays out and when we know what's coming in the bill, but it's just something we need to plan. Sorry.
So we need to have another board meeting prior to the one that we're having after the legislative session starts, just to.
So the board meeting is the second day of the session. And so I think it would be tight on people's schedules to plug in another board meeting the first week or two of January. And we have the officer meeting already. So let's go, Gary, and then Councilmember.
Just some food for thought on that point, and I know we don't want to get into a detailed conversation about it, but I find it really hard to not hold those cities accountable if it's going to affect the rest of the league. But I also feel like that's incumbent upon us as cities and not league staff to do. Because we can't have a fight against league staff because the league as a body is going to get impacted by this. I feel like maybe as board members, that's a role that we can play. Cameron.
Yeah, that's a real problem in terms of, we want to maintain the unity of the league to the extent we can, but if there's demonstrated bad conduct, we also, I think your solution is perfect that somebody from City X approaches them rather than the staff approaching them about this problem. It may be the same message, but the messenger maybe makes a difference here. Okay.
I was just going to mention just that the anecdotal stories moving policy are not just something we deal with. They are across the board in every policy area. I deal with them with my clients all the time. So the only thing I've ever found is that you have to spend a lot of time with the facts, and to overcome the anecdotes, you have to supply such a huge volume of facts. It doesn't feel remotely fair. The volume of facts to overcome one minimally true anecdotal story. The only other thing I've found that ever matters is the relationships. And I think we really need to be encouraging every city to have those pre-session meetings with their legislators, because you can combat it with personal relationships. If your legislators decide that you are a more trusted and valid source of your city info than, random neighbor or nephew who also has a myriad of other problems. That's the only thing. Those anecdotal stories get embedded and they'll get repeated.
That can't be overstated. Because I've had experience with that, where especially we provide the data to our own legislators, it has more credibility when it's coming from the city that they represent than it might coming from the league or anything like that. So to the extent that we can even become familiar with our own data that our staff is presenting. I mean, our staff has delivered this data to legislators and leadership, and I have actually just kind of seen them stuff it in their briefcase, and I don't know if they ever look at it. Say the comment about that
on the House side. On the Senate side, actually, to the credit of the Senate President, we delivered to the Senate President. Within an hour, we had his staff reaching out to us, and Senate President just gave us this information and asked us to do a deep dive with you. And 2 days later, we spent an hour and a half with his staff. So that's why I said it's mixed, because it depends who you talk to. So now let me add. Oh, Councilman.
I was just going to say, we recently had a dinner with the legislators that represent our area, and some of the housing like permits that have been issued and things like that. We updated, our legislators on that. But have they talked about a consequence for the cities that aren't complying with this? Like, is it going to be a fee or,
Yeah, so the answer is still up in the air, but the different ideas that have floated. One idea is, for lack of a better term, a quota. So if Riverton, for example, didn't have a certain percentage of housing units planned for that fit that definition, that could be apartments, townhomes, duplexes, whatever it is. If you didn't have that quota, then there would be the ability to have by right development in Riverton if you don't hit that quota. We, as a league, actually paid for data that the Utah Foundation collected last year on missing middle housing. And their data sets were a little old and incomplete, but it was at least a starting point for us to be able to see internally what what it looked like. So, in fact, that would probably be worth a deeper dive at the January board meeting, is to show you what the Utah Foundation found, recognizing it's a couple of years old. And that was in part what made us nervous about it when we found out what data sets they're using. The second thing is they propose withholding gas tax from cities that aren't compliant. So really by right development, gas tax, those are the two biggest remedies. And they may show up in the Fillmore White Bill or they may not. And that's why it's a little hard for us right now to say we should do this or do that until we see what's in that initial draft. Nick, can you quickly go to the next slide here actually, sorry, one more slide. On a positive note, on oh shoot, it's on the fourth slide that I cut when I sent to you. One of the pieces of our counter proposal we refer to as maximizing density. And that's the idea of where density makes sense around transit stops and others. How do we help transition from, say, wood frame buildings to steel frame buildings so you can get more units in an area that the city has planned for? Mill Creek and Draper and others have had that, Salt Lake have had that experience where you plan for high density development only to have more medium style density development come there because of market reasons. Well, we've been banging that drum multiple times this summer. And right now there's a meeting in the governor's office this very second around an HTRZ proposal in Vineyard. And Mayor Fulmer is, I believe, in that meeting, not our meeting, right? Nick, I didn't see her on because I think that's where she is. But it's an HTRZ concept. And we supported the creation of HTRZs a couple of years ago, but where that tax increment financing for that Vineyard project would actually go to help convert buildings from wood to steel and have a portion of those units set aside as affordable. So that's being discussed this very second over at the governor's office. And I think that could be in the win-win space for local governments and for developers. So spend more time on that than we intended, but stay tuned. Once we have a bill, we'll be notifying you to follow up. We'll continue working on that ripcord as a consequence for cities that are non-compliant. And then just know that is a major focus of some legislators and others of cities that in their minds are not doing their part, either on the administrative side or on the legislative zoning side.
And you said you had good news as well? I'm ready.
Well, the good news was the Vineyard piece, that they're having that discussion on the HDRZ proposal. Okay. Justin, anything else on that issue we want to hit?
No, not on that.
Okay. So Nick, will you skip over to the Google Doc? On Friday, we sent out a quick summary of the governor's budget document. Mayor Ramsey and I were both at the press conference Friday afternoon, and while we were there, league staff was back here pouring over the document to figure out what to bring forward to this group for consideration. So what you'll see here, we'll just quickly walk through. Some of these you've already actually considered. Nick had a slide in the board packet that gave you just a quick reminder of what you had considered in previous board meetings. So first, our shared local administrator, we're still working on the final details, but $1.6 million is in the governor's budget, and the governor called that out by name at the press conference as one of the items he was most excited about in his budget. In the housing section, in addition to the quote we shared with you, these are the 5 main points that are in his budget proposal. The first 4 you've already considered in previous board meetings. Number 5 is a program to expand what we supported last year. Last year, we supported a set aside to provide money for police officers who are first-time home buyers to help them with down payments. This would expand that program to educators, firefighters, and veterans who are first-time home buyers. So our recommendation as staff is that we support that as well. Moving down, Nick. Lee Ray McAllister. So just, yeah, right there's fine. Lee Ray McAllister Fund. We have not discussed this in the past year, but the Lee Ray McAllister Fund uses dollars to purchase open space and has been a very valuable resource for local governments around the state. And for years, it actually sat dormant. So the fact that the governor is proposing to put money, even though the majority of it be ongoing, this is still a significant investment in the Lee Ray McAllister Fund. So our staff recommendation would be to support it. Now, when I say support it, I'm not saying we're going to support $17 million and not a penny less. It's we support the investment, and then as the budget process goes on, we can figure out strategically where it makes sense to speak up in support. If the legislature comes back with 10 million instead of 17 million, we'd be supportive of that. If the legislature comes back with more, we'd be supportive of that. But this way we can be in those conversations. On property tax, there are two key pieces of property tax. Number one doesn't affect us directly. Number two does affect us directly. And it would be to expand the circuit breaker tax credit for low-income seniors or unmarried surviving spouses. That circuit breaker already exists. It impacts all property taxing entities, of which, of course, we are one. But there aren't enough details in the budget proposal yet to say yay or nay. So right now, we're not making a staff recommendation on that one. Go down to transportation. Actually, let me stop there because we thought these were the non-controversial ones. Any questions or comments on these? If not, we can have a motion.
Well, I guess I do not want to stand in the way of a motion on this with the governor's budget, but I know that they're swirling out there some other legislative proposals dealing with caps on property taxes. I don't know if this is related to that or would be.
Not yet, but that's on our agenda with the governor's staff this afternoon, is to talk through those other pieces. So that's why right now we're staying mum on property tax, but our recommendation is support Lee Ray McAllister and then that additional housing fund for first-time home buyers.
So does anybody have any issues with a motion to support what we talked about in the budget so far? I'll entertain a motion then.
I'd make that motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to support those recommendations. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
And double life for the active transportation.
All right, well, we're going to get to that, but thank you, Ms. Shepherd.
Perfect. Okay, transportation. So yes, Mayor Burton, this is music to your Viking ears, but the active transportation proposal that we attended the press conference for about a month ago now has a dollar amount attached to it, where they would create the active transportation investment fund, so the ATIF, and there would be both ongoing money and one-time money in the ATIF. So that's item one. Item two, we've just called growth, but now you've got a dollar amount for additional corridor preservation and investment in the state infrastructure bank. And we've been pushing for this through the UEOC. So it's great to see a dollar amount. Senator Harper has a bill file open with an appropriation request for $100 million for the state infrastructure bank. And the idea here is you expand the eligible uses so that it can also pick up water and sewer. And the objective is to open up areas for development that right now are pinched because of infrastructure challenges. And this really is an outgrowth of the local match ARPA fund from last year, but making it a revolving loan fund and really investing significant money in the SIB. In the new revenue side, the road usage charge, we've been pushing to make sure that as the state rolls out the road usage charge, that there would be a sharing of revenues with local government according to the existing formula. And then there's also additional money for researching electric vehicle transportation infrastructure. There's also dialogue going on right now about putting a surcharge on those EV stations. Then item 4 is transit. So they go down to the transit piece. The three biggest pieces here, the one that's gotten the most headlines, and I think will be definitely in the headlines throughout the session, is free fare transit. And the objective is to have a one-time pilot program with one-time money to offset fares in all of the transit systems around the state. So not just UTA, but all of them, from Suntran in the south to Cache Valley in the north, which I think is currently free fare anyway, but Park City Transit, High Valley Transit, the Uinta Basin bus system, Iron County and Cedar. And it would be one-time money, do the pilot and study the impact of that free fare. Right now, you have a lot of employers that subsidize free fare for employees. The governor's asking them to continue that, and then the state would pick up the rest of the free fare costs to analyze it. UDOT, UTA, MAG, and WFRC are currently studying the impact of free fares on UTA system. They estimate that this would increase ridership from between 24 to 36%. There would also be significant amount of transit investment in Point and that additional money for air quality monitoring and research. So our staff recommendation, as you see, is to support item 1. That's the active transportation investment fund. Support item 2, more money for corridor preservation in the SIB. Support item 3 with the road usage charge and in the discussions around electric vehicle infrastructure, including potentially that surcharge. Both 2 and 3 we brought to you previously with just support dialogue. So this would essentially be ratifying that now that it's in the governor's budget. And then item 4, we had listed this as TBD previously. So if you're ready to take a position, we can do that today. Or if you have questions you want us to follow up with, then we can gather information and bring it back to you in January for consideration, knowing that all of you are going to get questions about this from your constituents and from the media. I think this will be one of the most high profile asks in the governor's budget. So I want to make sure we get it right, even if that means we don't take a position on it today. So those are the staff recommendations of transportation.
I know with the free, ridership in Riverton, we don't have a single UTA stop. And so I know for our city, we would rather they use that money to expand, the current routes. So that our city is at least included, and other cities in the Southwest, instead of it just benefiting those places where it already exists. So that would be our feedback.
But one of the things when we had an experiment on this in last February in Salt Lake County anyway, where it was free fare February and ridership did go up. I understand the idea of expanding the system. I think there's also money in the budget for that too. I'm reluctant to say we don't want to support free fare and because there isn't a mechanism to use that to allocate that fare money yet, right? So I don't know, maybe we're not ready to take a position, but if we are, I think the free fare thing offers the prospect of getting more people to ride transit, which is something that we actually need to work on if we want to use that as a solution for air quality and congestion. So, and I support the idea of more transit options in the southwest part of Salt Lake County. I just don't know if this is the way to get there.
So I have a question. You said that the free fare will not affect businesses who are buying passes from now, so they'll need to continue to purchase the passes.
In the governor's budget proposal,
they're going to be encouraged to do that at least, just because they're already giving you that.
The estimate was from November interim was 35 million.
Yeah.
So you can see they're short. They still need those employers to contribute if they're going to meet that $35 million.
For businesses who are trying to get more people to come in and fill some spots, it is a perk that they can put on weekly, provide free free transit. It's helpful.
So what's the thought? Are we ready to move forward on this, or do we want to wait?
Well, I see a comment in the chat.
Okay.
I can read it out. So Mayor Gaines mentioned that Cache Valley Transit is already free fare. And then Mayor Ramsey said, Councilmember McKay, I did some homework and found out via transit on demand would be included in the free transit pilot. Since that is the transit service we have in the Southwest Valley, I'm supportive of this proposal.
Wait, that's not how you pronounce whatever that title was. Can you check it?
See pencil numbers. We do some interpreting. Thank you.
Then I'd be more likely to support it, if the VIA is.
I think the fact that the state is going to contribute the one-time money, I think all other proposals have looked at cities to contribute a big chunk for free fare, since the state is kind of awash in one-time money.
That's round 2.
Yeah.
Just the city's going to take care of it. They're going to come back to you and say, look, it improved ridership 30%. We now need you to pay for it now.
We're never gonna know if we don't try it.
That's right.
I'd rather the state try it, or we try it and it doesn't.
Oh, I agree.
Increase, and then we say, well, I guess it doesn't pencil and goes away. But I'd so much rather try it with.
I agree.
The state's giant surplus than.
And I think there's an argument to turn that back. If they made that kind of an argument, we might want to participate. But on the other hand, the state just enabled it. If it does work, then it's, and the other thing is that you might have some areas of the state that might decide to do it that might be more flush or whatever than other parts of the state. So keeping it on a statewide basis so the transit is free in our whole state, I think is a meritorious thing. And I personally think that getting support of this early will help us advocate for it more even early in the session, so it stays alive, basically.
Well, and Mayor Silvestrini, we as staff added this question: what questions do you have about this proposal? Because you could essentially do a twofold piece here and say, we support it in concept, we want these questions answered, right? And that way you serve the goal of being out front, and say, state, we support you willing to take the risk. And then to Councilmember McKay's point, there are going to be a lot of unanswered questions that we need to answer. But I know the Salt Lake Chamber is planning to take a position this week. There's going to be some media coverage. I think there's value in us saying we like the concept, and then we're working behind the scenes to get more answers as we work toward the session.
Yeah, and one of those questions I think can definitely be formulated right now. What effect is this going to have on expansion of transit to underserved areas, including South?
May I add that I think the most people I talk to who don't use public transportation is not because of the cost, right? So I think that this is good, but I don't think that's the solution. I think we need to look at why they don't do it. And some of the things they're doing now is cutting back on frequency of riding. I think that's one of the big reasons they don't do it. Because if they cut back on frequency, some of the areas that go through our area, they drop it from coming every 30 minutes, every 60 minutes. And that makes it much more difficult to ride when you can't time it, what your needs are. So I'm not opposed to this, but I think they need to look at other ways to do it and find out what the real reason is people want to ride it. I don't think
they're addressing that. They're looking at double tracking. They're looking at everything they can to speed up time and obviously east and west from transit, from your stations. I know UTA is looking heavily into that as to how they can more effectively get people, because that is the biggest reason. That said, if they throw 25 million into it and it gives a 30% increase in ridership, that's huge.
that is huge.
Whether it was the people that, whether we're still not getting those other people, that's not a cost issue. For me, it's not a cost issue. I don't ride transit because there's no way for me to get east and west. And
perhaps as a question we could ask would be if the entities were to receive this influx of funding from the state, would that allow them to shift any of their budgets to building out different infrastructure? Because I share, Councilmember or Council Member McKay's concern. We've been hearing that ERT is coming south in this county, and I hope it happens before I die.
Yeah, but that's a good question. And it's probably a really good one to ask. If they're going to divert $25 million of income, they're going to come from another fund to give them UTA 25 million. Should UTA not be using $25 million then to? Yeah,
recognizing that 25 is going to get spread statewide. So,
right, yeah.
But significant of it would go to UTA. So that'd be a question I would love to ask.
And can I ask a question for board members from the Cache Valley or Southwestern Utah or the Basin, all of whom have their own transit systems? Any thoughts you want to specifically raise?
Well, this is Scott Phillips in Cedar City. Ours is small, but I know ridership would certainly increase if it were free fare. We're in the process of doing a transit study right now for Enoch, Parowan, and Cedar City about trying to expand our transit system with UDOT. I think it'd be a good effort on our behalf, and I don't think it would necessarily put any additional burden on our city.
We're also looking at, could there be a connection through Sardine Canyon to get to UTA and Brigham City if Front River connects? Again, we're building Cache Valley Transit District's building a big new, center to try and, if we had some funding we could use to make the routes more frequent, again, keep them free, but increase the frequency. I agree with the comments that were made earlier that just the convenience factor is one of the biggest things we fight.
You see that Mayor Walker has his hand up. I can't tell if anybody else does, but Mayor?
Yeah, one of the issues, I'm not supporting the concept of it, but one of the issues we ought to talk to UTA about is the security. Most of the time, there are officers around the trains or buses, checking fares. And if it's a free fare, I want to make sure that they're on there still. I mean, we need to make sure that they're enforcing their security on the trains. And I don't know what that looks like when you're not enforcing fares. How are we going to get the officers and whatnot, on the vehicles? Because we can't let down on that. They need to be safe. And I know that's always been the reason they're on there is checking fares. And that's one of the ways you kind of get riffraff off the system is they haven't paid. So if it's free, there's going to have to be another criteria.
It's a homeless
That's
issue.
a really good point.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Well, we're ready because we still need to water, and then we got another issue too. So
Okay, so do we want to adopt, do you want to recommend that we support all four of these things on transit?
Yes.
Somebody want to make a motion?
So moved.
Okay, a motion from Mayor Burton to give the staff support to these proposals in the governor's budget. Is there a second?
Second.
Is that Mayor Walker?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, discussion? All in favor?
The only discussion I have is when I take the public transportation, it makes it really nice because I don't have to look at the road. I can look at my date instead and look at my wife. My concentration's on her. So it makes driving much nicer.
All right.
Transportation date night, way to go, bud.
Yeah.
Right, all in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, Cam.
Perfect. Justin. All right, let's talk about water. Several things in here in water, and most of them I think are no-brainers as far as support. Most of the discussions around water and fundings here come around infrastructure. So running through a few of these, 75 million for water reuse, specifically in southern Utah. I know there's a lot of questions about water reuse in different parts of the state and different levels of what people agree with, what makes sense and doesn't make sense. So this is just specifically for southern Utah, where everyone seems to agree that does make a lot of sense. $1 million for conservation and education. $1 million is really not that much if you've ever done a statewide education fund. So that's probably something that needs to happen. One of the questions we always have is, what is the end goal here? What are we actually trying to do? Fill up reservoirs, stay for the future, get the Great Salt Lake. So having some education out there is probably going to be helpful there. $5 million for non-functional turf removal. This program started last year. We'll talk about this more in a little bit, but just additional money for turf buyback programs, basically. Number 4 is $243 million to invest in the Utah Coordinated Action Plan for Water. If you look below, you notice I put an additional info on this one before taking it. Not because I think there's anything wrong with the Utah Coordinated Action Plan for Water, but it's a really big plan and I don't remember everything that's in it. So before I say, yes, we love that, I want to go back and reread that thing. So it's, again, not that I think there's anything problematic in it, but it's a big chunk. And then $133 million for the Great Salt Lake. A big chunk of this one is actually going to purchase short-term water rights. One of the problems we have now, particularly with agriculture, agriculture uses a lot of water. We know they use the vast majority of water. That's a question we get from our members a lot of the time, is what is ag doing? Part of this is to actually go out and secure water rights so they can just divert that water straight into the Great Salt Lake. So it's not going to other places. So this one doesn't necessarily impact us directly, but it is part of that conversation about getting water to the Great Salt Lake and what is ag doing right now. And this is just a direct shot at trying to get a hold of some of that water. So happy to have any discussion about any of that anybody wants to, but I am suggesting we support, not that we're not supporting number 4, just not saying we should yet, but 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to recommend, I guess, support for staff on these issues on the governor's budget. Discussion?
So just to be clear, we're doing 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Yep, totally on board.
I can just comment. These just seem like really big, and I know, Eric Lucy's in the leadership of the Utah Lake Commission and Authority, and these just seem like big decisions that I don't know that. I mean, we're 100% that these are the right ways to go, and there maybe is another idea or another funding that even the Utah Lake needs help too. And I don't think this is a easy one that it's kind of coming across. And while this probably is the right thing to do to vote yes for it, I just want to scream a little bit first and say, are we sure? Because are we maybe going to look into this a little more and want to go back on any of this? I don't know.
Well, if I can on that, I think with all these, one is the governor's budget, which is worth the paper it's printed on. Yeah, could you do that for me? Thank you. So governor's budget is recommendations. This is what people want to say. So we're saying, these are good ideas, this is good direction. The numbers barely matter. This is what he's suggesting that we hash it all out. So I think what we're saying, this allows us to go to the governor and say, we think these are good ideas. And we have additional discussion. So I don't want to oversell it like, yeah, these are the best ideas ever. This is perfect. But I also, it's the governor's budget and I don't want to hash through what that's going to be because that's what the whole session's about.
In the officer meeting with the governor's staff this afternoon, we plan to talk water and revenue are the main
hash through some of that. Yeah.
I think
One of the questions,
General report, you know.
I guess,
Sorry.
one of the, I also sit on the Utah Lake Commission with Mayor Kusti, and one of the things that we transition, maybe you can ask, as we transition to the Utah Lake Authority, money was set aside last session for that, that hopefully that money then is secure for helping Utah Lake. So maybe that's why it's not on a priority here with the governor's budget, but can maybe you clarify that for us?
Yeah. I'll
Make sure
of
that those funds that were allocated are continued for Utah Lake.
So we have a motion and a second to support these priorities. I think it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the universe. We'll keep that in mind. So any further discussion? So all in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Not hearing any opposed, so that passes. Thank you.
Nick, can you go to H2O Collective? I don't know if it's easier for me to take the mouse for a minute or if it makes sense there.
This is where you want to be?
Yeah, this is where I want to be. So we're going to jump over just for a quick, and this is a preview. Some of you have heard us talk about the H2O Collective in the past. What this is, it's an effort between our staff here in the league, people on the board. We have members representing cities that are part of this, and the 4 largest water conservancy districts, the PREP 60 districts. And what the goal of the H2O Collective, a lot of you are aware of the Land Use Academy of Utah, Luau. This is sort of that, but for water. So what we're doing is we've been working, and some of you have given us some information, and this is going to be an effort to provide information to our cities about water conservation, about best practices when it comes to water, about efforts that have been effective when it comes to educating the public. And this is what the website looks like. It's not out there public yet. Nobody can really find this. So I've got kind of a weird trial name up there, but just want to give you as a board a preview of what this is. So if you're a city, you're looking for resources, I'm trying to develop a conservation plan. You can click on that and we'll have model ordinances. You can look at what Orem did, what Genola did, what Logan did, what South Jordan did, and give you some resources there for how to write that kind of a plan. If you want to communicate with the public about water conservation, you can click here and see drought public messaging, filter strip rebates, Harriman landscape requirement tables. You'll be able to see what other cities have been doing, what other resources are out there. A lot of this is going to be written directly by cities, also by the water conservancy districts, who of course are the experts in a lot of this. But we're going to have a lot of resources coming out on this resource library. Just click on this one really quick. I showed some of this. I know there's some in here from Clearfield that we've got, and some others. We'll have information about grants. So what are the grants for secondary metering? We're working on this. So you can see this is a working website. It's not there yet. Turf removal, information is coming, but just wanted to show this to you, let you know this is coming. The other part of this effort is as we get more out there, that we can go to the legislature and say, hey, these are the things that we are working on. You don't need to mandate every little thing. Here's all the things that are going on right now. Here's the best practices that we are sharing.
So this will be live before legislative session?
This will be live before legislative session starts. We don't have a hard date on it, but before the 18th, yeah. Well, 17th. But yes, we're working on nailing down those last few pieces. And then as part of the effort going to the legislative session, We will have a one pager that we'll do a desktop on. Not that we think that those do a whole lot of good, but also the, cost benefit is pretty low on those. It doesn't take a lot for us to create it and put it out there. But this is something that we'll keep putting out there and sharing information with our membership. And so one, if you have great information from your city, if you have a program that has worked really well, feel free to reach out to Molly or I, and we can help get that up on the website.
Do you have West Jordan on there?
I think we do have some West Jordan on here, but if not, yeah.
Yeah, brag about yourselves to me.
Please do. And then we're going to continue building this out so we have that information as there's, and if there's something that's missing, as we share this out there and you say, I would really like to know more about whatever the thing is that we've forgotten, building a new water tank on the mountainside, I don't know, whatever it is, please let us know and then we can fill in gaps there as well. So again, nothing we really take action on, but we're just working to get this information out there. And then this, since 2000, Utah water conservation districts have spent $355 million on conservation programs. This would be a place you can go to grab information. If you need data points when you're talking about water, our goal is to have some stuff there you can grab and quickly share with legislators and others as well. So cool. That was easy. We're doing something good. Any questions or comments on that one?
So it's not live yet, or it is?
Not live yet. It'll be live before the session.
But we want to have staff look at it and you've got a link.
Yeah, I can send you a link if you want to staff look at it. Yeah.
I'm happy to flow with it.
You're ready for it? Beautiful. Okay.
You're drowning in too much information.
Hold on, let me see my watch.
We'll swim through it.
Yeah, right. And then I'm not sure. Yeah, those are, oh, there you go. If you want to go to on the board agenda, just that article on turf buyback. Turf buyback. Or yeah. So one of the things, and near Soda Street, I know we've had discussions with this with Representative Owens. A lot of the discussions this year when it has come to water has been around big infrastructure. If you've been in any of the ULCT working groups, anyway, have some city people there, a lot of it just comes down to big water discussions. One of the things we're going to ask the governor's office this afternoon is, are there policies, because there was a whole lot passed last year, that you're expecting or hoping for, that we expect to see this year. But one of the things that we're almost certainly going to see discussion on is non-functional turf. And we talked about this several different times, but Nick, you can scroll down a little bit. Yeah, free cremation.
What's with a free cremation cost guide? Isn't that like a oxymoron? Yes, it just turns me out.
One of the best legislative hearings I was ever in was Steve handing around a bill a couple years ago about not cremating people, but basically melting them down.
With the tree one?
No, not the tree one. This is one that goes into the sewers after you melt the person down.
What?
And that was just one of the best committee hearings I've ever been in. Yeah. So
It's water. It's a way to get water to them.
right there you go. So, anyway, Washington County Conservancy District just announced $2 a square foot to tear out non-functional grass. The reason that's a big deal is prior to them announcing that last week, the highest amount we were seeing is $1.50 here in the state. So if you see the second paragraph down, it's the most offered by a water district in the state. 150 was the most offered before that. By comparison, the Southern Nevada Water Authority based in Las Vegas offers a $3 a square foot as an incentive. Now, the reason I bring that up is if you talk about non-functional turf, you inevitably come around to comparisons with Nevada and Las Vegas because they've been extremely aggressive with things. They've been doing a lot, and they've banned non-functional turf, trying to get rid of it by 2026. So we expect to see some kind of legislation that there's a large continuum as to what this word could mean, but some kind of ban on non-functional turf. That could range from, first, yes, we know we would have to define what non-functional turf is, and the best definition most people give is the only time you walk on it is when you mow it, but that's hard to put in legislation. I can't imagine that being the definition. But there are questions. Is there a percentage of turf allowed? Is it no new turf for corporations or for a company that comes into your city? Is there maximum or minimum? So just want to have a quick discussion. Mayor Silvestrini, would love, your input on this, what you've heard from Representative Owens, as to how we feel about going into non-functional turf discussions. We don't necessarily need to take position because we don't know what a bill looks like yet, but we do love some discussion and some thoughts as to how we approach this, knowing that we're not huge fans of mandates when it comes to anything, but also knowing there's a lot of discussion about what can we do to reduce the use of turf.
So that's the real nub here, I think, is the mandate part of it. Representative Owens is interested in having the state essentially take a position to seek less non-functional turf, and his thought was a mandate. And the discussions that we've been having with him is we all have this goal, but how do we achieve it without it being a mandate? And then the other question is, are there some communities that are resistant to the idea of it, and might even welcome some more direction, if you will, on it, to be able to defend that kind of a position with some residents that are concerned about eliminating grass. So anyway, that's something I think that's a big we're going to be having in the future on this, and trying to balance that with our priorities of not having mandates. Very huge.
Bountiful spent. Oh,
I was just going to say, I really hope you bring this up.
7, 8, I'm sure you do. We've spent many months talking about this issue. And just one thing I want to point out is for cities that are already built and already have park strips, that's one issue, because park strips were basically designed to have turf in them. Mm-hmm. That's not a big deal, other than the fact that if you're built on a hill, the replacements for turf are really problematic for your storm drain system. Almost anything else you put in, including just concrete, creates runoff problems. If you're talking about rocks of any kind, any of that can get washed off, and does get washed off into our storm drain system.
Yeah, I can show you a storm drain that's clogged with pink landscaping rocks.
That's right. We've had this conversation, right? And so we carved an exception out in our ordinance to allow turf in steeper slope areas for that very reason. So if we would definitely call that functional turf, it absolutely has a purpose. So
you still might only walk on it when you mow it, but
there's a function.
But there's a function to it.
And that's a good distinction. I like that a lot. That is functional turf.
Look, we get called all the time. I get called a lot, just saying, well, when are they going to start paying us to make it worthwhile? So I don't think it's that people don't want to do it. I just think it's expensive to replace something there.
There's a cost of doing it, and there are some programs that provide at least an offset to the cost of it. But you also, in order to qualify for those now, you need to have a water policy in your municipality that.
We don't have the staff to police the policies that are required of the city. So, but I'm just saying, yeah, so if they would put some incentives in there, for sure, I think more people would.
Okay.
I heard the lake has staff that could help.
Yeah, we would love to run around and check grass.
Yeah.
I'll come to case about those. That's the only option.
Has there been some concern on reducing the turf and the heat that it creates?
So there's a lot of debate around that. And depending who you talk to, I've asked this question to a lot of people this year. The trees do a big lift when it comes to reducing the heat. If you get rid of grass but you keep the trees, it doesn't seem to have that much of an impact. If you get rid of grass and trees, then it becomes more of a problem.
So some of the demonstration gardens like Jordan Valley Water Conservancy show ways that
backyard, yes.
Yeah, so they show ways that you can eliminate the turf, but still not create heat islands, because you still can have plants. They just need to be more water wise and different. So.
That's true. When I'm out campaigning, I can feel the difference. Door to door. Some have more heat.
So I did hear, so incentives are a big part of this. If there are incentives, that certainly helps. And maybe that's the key, is it's not so much the mandate, but let's update and beef up some of these programs, which is in the governor's budget.
Going back to the tree, maybe part of the educational piece would be if we are taking out turf, but we're keeping trees. I was talking to someone, and I can't in my brain remember where it was, but it was an arborist who was talking about a particular kind of tree that it's about uses about, or stocks up, whatever we want to say, 500 gallons of water, these certain trees. And so maybe part of it is using our water conservancy districts to do more education for the particular area of the state on what kind of trees, if they are replacing trees too, to make it more effective and efficient. Because if you're just doing away with grass, then you still have trees that are sucking down water, then it doesn't happen.
Yeah, because trees use a lot of water too, absolutely.
I think when we're talking about as an opportunity to the staff to check someone's park strip to make sure they can get the incentive. If they want us to do that, we need some offset. If we want it to be the water conservancy districts that have that burden to provide the incentives and do the check. We've found, and I'm sure all of you have found, that there are contractors out there that are just pitching, like, we'll come in and scrape everything off and just dump gravel, which doesn't comply with the Weaver Basin program. It doesn't comply with our city ordinance or our updated city ordinance. But that's probably your cheapest route, but it's a real compliance burden because we're not going to go check, and they complain that they can't give the incentive. So
they shouldn't,
and they shouldn't. They totally have not complied. But that's incentives are great, but if there's going to be a requirement to keep a certain amount of greenery to deal with heat islands, and then we need to make sure that some of that money is helping with that compliance component.
The last thing I'll ask on, if I can, is what do we feel about a distinction between new development versus, like, say, established? If we're saying going forward, anything new can only have this amount or whatever, is there a difference in how we feel about that?
Well, I think that's the only thing you really can do. I mean, there's some vested rights in that existing regime, right, to make people change, absent some percentage of redevelopment or new development, infill development, whatever. You can do it on it. It simply does some infill development. You can acquire it, but it's totally problematic to make somebody with existing landscaping change all that.
Any high growth communities in here?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry,
I'm just trying to remember.
Lehigh's on the call, Harriman's on the call, South Jordan.
And we get it just for new.
Just for new construction. And again, we were very successful last year in getting the legislation that was proposed down to something that we could live with. Not quite where we wanted with Ray Ward, but Representative Wilcox worked really well with us. And I don't think that not everyone in the legislature is just on board that we just get rid of TURP either. But just want to have this discussion as we get ready and see those coming out. That this is something we'll need to talk about, so I appreciate the discussion. But I also know we have several other things we need to hit in the next 23 minutes.
I just want to put in my additional plug for those who have wildland phase ordinances that for high fire risk, that we do not eliminate all turf or water-wise measures, because we do need some irrigation to keep those areas safe from potential fires.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe not started on our own property, but can be started on state and federal land where they have policy in place not to fight the fires, and it then comes into our cities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for that feedback, and stay tuned. There will be bills in this space, and we'll be bringing them back to the board and specifically LPC over the next few weeks. So in our last few minutes here, it's in the executive director report section. This is your chance to chime in on priorities for the upcoming year's budget. Normally, this is a conversation we have after the session, and you can see why, because so much of our time is consumed with preparing for the session. But because of the change to distribute dues earlier in the year, we're planning on having you approve dues in January rather than April. We wanted to give you a chance to opine on budget priorities in this meeting so that we can prepare the dues accordingly. As a reminder, last spring we reorganized internally. We hired a deputy director, Rachel Terry, has been fantastic. And we created really 3 divisions within the organization. Nick, can you just click down to the organizational chart?
The chart?
Yeah, just start the chart. So yeah, the three functions: advocacy, engagement, and operations. And you can see how we've tried to organize our staff. We also, when we brought goals and objectives to you last year, broke those down by division. So we have goals there in your packet. The goals and objectives for operations, advocacy, and engagement. We haven't even hit the halfway point of this year, so we don't have a report card yet for you on how we were doing with those goals for this year, but that's how we organized our goals. The 4 of us, advocacy, engagement, operations, and me, the executive staff, went through and created a document for you that's in your packet called the organizational functions. And it's the effort by us to give you a high level understanding of what each group does, including the board of directors. And then we've aligned those with the goals that you adopted in the spring. So within the document, you have the organizational functions for the board as well as for each division. Now, within the operations division, Nick is undertaking a large project. Nick, you put a packet in the board about it. Can you just take 1 minute to explain the policies and procedures work you're going to be doing?
Absolutely. Very briefly, we just want to bring this to your attention now. I was fortunate enough to participate in an executive education certificate with the David Eccles School of Business at the University of Utah called Transformational Operations and Performance in Government and Nonprofits.
Yes, I can tell.
Indeed. And as part of that, I brought in, my project was an update to our personnel and accounting policies and procedures. I've included in the board packet my executive summary from that. What I'm basically doing is taking a holistic look and overhaul at our policies and procedures. And we put it through this scientific flow that the program really presented, these rules of flow, the principles of transformational operations and performance. You can see how this is all laid out. I won't go into too many details because we will be bringing it to you. But by the end of this fiscal year, we want to redefine it. This is all in the packet. We want to completely overhaul our policies and procedures to make sure that we are balancing efficiency as well with compliance. So you can look at all the details here of how I will go about that and bring it forward to you. But really, we just want to be lean and mean. We have to be, but we also need to make sure that we are following the law and also best practices. So happy to answer any questions offline anyone has for that, but we will continue to bring this to you as the year goes on.
Perfect. Thank you, Nick, for that work. So the action we're going to ask from you in about 15 minutes is to give us direction on potential dues to prepare for you to consider in January. As a reminder, and Nick's put a couple of memos in the document, we actually have the spring document that we just used word for word from the spring. Last year, the board, for the first time in many years, modified the dues rate. So we had a dues increase. And the thought was, or the direction at the time was to do a 2-step increase. One increase for this fiscal year, one increase for next fiscal year, in order to meet a board goal of having dues cover 95% of our non-conference and personnel related expenses. In addition to that, the board also gave us direction to seek other revenue streams, which we were successful at doing with the increased conference revenue over the past year, and by bringing the metro townships on board within the league membership. So what Nick has prepared for you is basically a document that says, in order to hit that 95% goal the next fiscal year, we would need to continue with the plan we put forward last spring of a slight dues increase. Or if you chose not to do a dues increase, we're projecting right now that, again, we're only less than halfway through the fiscal year, but we're projecting right now we'd be like 92 to 93% if you just let the formula run as currently constituted, in part because the metro townships will be a part of it. So again, you're not making that decision today. We'll be asking you for direction so we can start preparing dues, and we've suggested these 2 options for you. But before you do that, what are we doing? Going back to those questions we asked at the last meeting, what, if anything, is the league not doing that you wish we would do? And what, if anything, are we doing that you wish we would do more of? Because that'll be helpful to us as we're laying out the budget for next year. So, thoughts. And Nick, Nick's got this document we can refer to if of what we're currently doing, but thoughts on what we're not doing that you wish we would do, or things we're doing you wish we would do more of.
And the third question of things we're doing, we should stop doing.
So you've already reached out to the Metro Townships, right?
Yep, they've all joined for this year. Yep.
Are they attending?
Yeah, they're at the annual convention. I actually don't know if they've joined LPC or not. And our ledge team went up to the trust to get things ready up there.
We've talked a little bit in the past about our youth. We've occasionally had youth go with us to, and we took a huge group this last year, but to our mid-year meetings in DC. It would be good to either to help facilitate that for cities. We've had several reach out to us, ask us how we did it. We met with the youth councils in South Jordan and Taylorsville last week with Just Serve. They'll be making a presentation in DC as well. And again, as I talked to I just lost her name from Taylorsville, Mayor. Thank you. We talked about how we facilitated that and what were their activities created for the youth. And it would be good to look at that and say, how do we, if they're going to be here, how do we include them in where we are? And make sure that they're, if the youth are going to go do an activity that they're able to do that as youth. And that they have a place to stay, but maybe we help facilitate where they're going to stay. That was the one challenge we came across in getting them there was not having a centralized way to do travel and hotels. So they ended up staying at Chevy Chase.
So Mayor, are you asking the league to help with travel plans for the youth and activities for the youth?
Yeah. I'd like to see more cities do it.
I suppose I'd like to maybe push back on that a little bit. I think if a city wants to pay to have their youth go, that's fine, but I don't know that it's the best resource of staff, of our limited league staff time to entertain youth councils. And I know that there's an education component, but compared with the needs that exist with the elected officials, my perspective is I'm not sure it's an effective use of staff time. You could bring additional staff from your own city or elected officials from your own city to help facilitate those things.
Well, we're more concerned with facilitating travel itself and accommodations because the league has the ability to, with the National League as well, to pick up different accommodations that are at least closer to where.
That's what I was going to say. Does the National League have any resources, because they do so much work in the DC area, of having, whether they have referrals for travel companies who do this that maybe we could endorse? And
I'll check.
And then the cities could just say, oh, here are several travel agencies who do this.
Yeah, so I see some potential value if this gets prioritized is connecting the cities who are interested in taking youth councils to the NLC Youth Council staff.
Yes.
Because they do have that staff that could potentially help. And, last year, I think they're, without us actually being the ones doing it. So other thoughts. I see Mayor Daines, does the SA contest seem worth the work that goes into operating it? We'll make a note of that. You have a few people who are nodding their heads. We have one sponsor who covers the cost of the SA contest, and that's the only thing they ask for. They don't ask for anything else in the sponsorship program, but
I like it.
We'll make a note of it.
I think it's great.
I like judging the essays.
I do too. I like reading them. I like the fact that kids are looking around the community, finding what they like, noticing what is working, what's good. And
I think if you get a sponsor covering the cost of it.
Yeah, exactly. If someone's paying for it.
That's worth
I've enjoyed reading them too. It's interesting. That's funny.
When you say you're reading them, is it just ones that were submitted for your city?
No.
Or is there a judge?
As a judge.
Which is really hard because then one's better than the one from your city.
Yeah.
And it's fun. They get a little bit of a scholarship too, to the school and to themselves. So, you're right.
Nick, was there a handout? Okay, so can
I ask staff a question? For me, I think legislative advocacy is still the number one role, and And with the additional legislation that's coming and has been passed, I've seen you spend a huge amount of time just on 462 compliance and helping cities be compliant with that. My question for staff is, do you feel like we have enough resources, or that you have enough time with existing resources to help with compliance on new legislation, not just advocacy? Because we're all seeing with 462, that how much time that's taken. What are your thoughts, Cam, Justin, and Rachel?
I think if we had more than 462, if this was growing and we're going to do compliance checks on a lot of things, I don't think we would have the bandwidth for that. I think 462 is a special case because compliance with that so directly impacts legislative discussions that it falls in that same realm. So I think if that were to be expanded to a lot of things, I think we'd have a hard time keeping up with that. But this one also was a bit of a special case.
Rachel, do you want to give an update on your thoughts on all the moving pieces with guiding your growth and ULUI? Because like the big missing link there is compliance with state law and land use.
So one of the things I'm spending a lot of time on right now is trying to coordinate the different pieces within the state land use training and support, because that is something that's traditionally been a big part of the league, is providing training, figuring out, and now there's all these new, I don't know how new, but these other entities that are participating in that. You have the Utah Land Use Institute that's been providing training, the trust, USIP, and a variety of others. And now the Ombudsman's office has hired someone to try to do training coordination. And then as we've been moved into more and bigger advocacy issues, there's been less time for Meg Ryan, who's traditionally been traveling and doing training in the land use space. So she's had less time because she's working more on legislation and talking to compliance and all those sorts of things. So one thing we're trying to do right now is really create lanes in coordination between all the different entities who are providing training. January 4th, we'll be meeting with representatives from ULUI, Envision, Laura Hansen's office of GOPB, the Ombudsman's office, to say, here, what are the resources? How do we coordinate them? How do we make sure they're getting to the places they need to be? What kind should they be? Where should they be? How should they be? And the goal is at the end of that coordination, that we really roll out something that's more meaningful to cities. One thing that we are hoping that we'll have support on is in this ordinance review that's being done by Envision, is have it be less. So they're looking at what ordinances impact affordable housing. So they're looking at that. What we're hoping they'll come away with is policy questions and answers. I like to think of it as a choose your own adventure book. You say, if you turn the page to this part for this kind of thing, these are the outcomes. You turn the page here, you get these outcomes, so that rather than model ordinances, we're saying to city officials, you need to think through, here are your big policy questions. Here are the outcomes you get with those if you answer it in these different ways. And then if you want to answer it this way, these are the ordinance type language that you need to put in so that you are actually moving your policies. You're aligning what you're hoping your outcomes are with what your policies actually say. And that dovetails with the guiding your growth and a variety of other things. But really, we're hoping at the end of the year, we have a clear, more comprehensive training portfolio, because that's not present right now. And that's going to be a big push in the next few months to make sure we're getting your cities and the cities across the state the kind of resources they need. And it's feedback we get from planning commissioners and city council members saying, I'm not exactly sure how to get there. And where do they go for that information? So that's going to be something we worked on this year, and would greatly appreciate your input on how we answer those questions when we get there. And as an aside, there's money in the Ombudsman's office that's just sitting there that we haven't been able to access, and we've been reassured with this new person coming to the Ombudsman's office that financial support will go into these screening plans that we'll hopefully come away with together. And then using our luau platform as a way to really coordinate, as Justin said, like in water, we really use that as a platform to coordinate and consolidate resources to give them cities information to do what they need to do. And that kind of dovetails with hopefully with compliance, is as we say, here's how you do things. You need to go to these kind of workshops to really sort it out. That will be a resource available. But it won't be us necessarily holding anyone's hands. They will through a particular application.
The one thing I'll add to the excellent information Rachel just gave you is it's everything she just described to you is consuming a lot of her time, and your willingness to raise dues last year facilitated us hiring a deputy director who can now be in this space trying to coordinate all of these moving pieces and figure out how to help on the training and compliance side. So thank you for your willingness last spring to expand our staff so we could be in that space. It's paid a lot of dividends over the last year. And your question is a fair one because every day I get several calls or emails from cities asking about compliance here, compliance there. And Roger and Todd and Justin, Rachel, we all take those calls and we're trying to figure out the best way to help there.
Well, it ties into this concept of running the legislature's passing ordinances faster than we can keep up by implementing them. It's a challenge, right? So.
Do you want to, there's a couple comments, at least one in that chat.
Yeah, so Councilmember Mary Lynch said, continue to provide support with land use training and issues related to growth, especially critical for communities that may not have the necessary resources or expertise to deal with these issues on their own. ULCT support has been so valuable this past year. And then that was the last one on that. We talked about the essay contest, we mentioned that, and then Mayor Ramsey has a hand up.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Hey, this felt like a good time to just kind of piggyback onto what Rachel's saying, shift gears a little bit, but she's been doing quite a bit of work on this. And I just wanted to mention, there's been a trend across the country that states are looking at in trying to do some sort of a civility pledge or something like that. South Carolina has a civility pledge, and a lot of states are following suit with that. But actually here in Utah, the conversation has been along those same lines, but Tammy Pfeiffer, working with Tim Shriver, they've started the Dignity Index is what they're calling it. And just recently, I just want to mention on the Hinckley Report, Tim Shriver was on the Hinckley Report with Boyd Matheson, and they said the Dignity Index is not designed to suddenly change the behavior of elected officials. It's community and culture that lead, and the politicians will follow. Anyway, it's an interesting report on the Dignity Index, and that's some work that we've been asked to engage in. And so I know Rachel and Tammy and I are going to sit down and meet about this right away and talk about this, but try to explore and then bring back to you guys and really give a comprehensive conversation about what's the right way here in Utah for us to pledge ourselves to civility, and what model can the Dignity Index be incorporated in, and how can we kind of create a program that we might be able to be inclusive with other forms of government agencies in committing ourselves here in Utah to being an example of civility and how to do things right. So just wanted to mention that because I know Rachel spent quite a bit of time on that, and I talked to Tammy about it Saturday. We're going to be talking about that soon, but just an FYI, we're going to be bringing more information back to you all as we try to figure out the right way for Utah to incorporate some sort of pledge and method for keeping ourselves to a high standard and hopefully setting that standard for our residents as well.
Yeah. So just to add on to what she's talking about, when Tim Shriver was here a couple of weeks ago, I met with him and Tammy Pfeiffer, who is the COO for Unite Us, and Dignity Index is one of the projects under that umbrella. And we're working with Tammy to create something for Utah cities and towns that hopefully will be a model that integrates the data that they're creating through this Dignity Index, which isn't just what we're trying to work on is something that's more robust than just a civility pledge, like actually providing tools and resources to think through that. Another opportunity that just came up is partnering with the Hinckley Institute, where Arthur Brooks is what do they call him? Visiting professor resident, where Tim Shriver will also be, and being able to utilize him as a resource. So again, one of the things is Cam mentioned that this role allows me to do is take on these projects and these coordination. And we think, particularly by coordinating, collaborating with Unite Us, we can create something that can be a model that can be shared at the national level if we can get it right. And they're making an ask to Intermountain and other partners to see if they can get the resources to bring on the staff to create it, but it's something that we think could be valuable to create here within our league and roll it out to our city.
And for those of you who don't know, it's a bipartisan national attempt at this point. I've had Tammy speak at a couple of conventions so far about this. It's well received. It is kind of a wake-up call on how we communicate with each other, especially in the political world. And I am excited to think that we are coming to a place where we might partnership with the Hinckley Institute on this and having speakers that can come in. Because one of the things that she said is if you are a husband and you introduce your wife to your colleagues, you don't say, here's my wife, I treat her with civility. She'd smack you because that's not real. That's kind of an insult to say that you treat your wife with civility, but if they know that you treat her with love and respect, that's a different dialogue. And so even though you can have robust discussions and have differences of opinions on policy, it's about having the discussion, knowing you can have hard discussions, but not having to take it down to levels that you really aren't internally, and not just jumping on those bandwagons. And so I really support that we're going forward with this. Thank you, Rachel.
Well, before we say we're going forward with it, we're exploring it.
Yeah,
because
exploring it.
It would consume a lot of bandwidth, it would consume a lot of time, and again, if the board feels like it's worthwhile, that's, something has to give on the other end, right? Because, Rachel's been phenomenal over the last few months, but as she said, this role is taking on a lot of special projects. So to your point here about advocacy, the joke here is advocacy swallows everything. And so even though you'll see a lot of names in the engagement space on the screen, every single person in the engagement has advocacy responsibilities. The legislature just keeps growing, and then we're constantly trying to figure out the right balance there.
Well,
but are there,
I was going to say, some of the feedback you give back to the governor's office, can you just explain that? I think cities generally want to comply. We want to be cooperative, but we need help with it. So can they provide some funding? Can they provide some resources so that we have the resources that we need to get that help? Some cities will be proactive and reach out directly, and some of them won't, and they just maybe don't even know how to navigate that. So it would be nice. I mean, they want us to be cooperative. I think we want to be cooperative, but we need help. So,
and if I can just say, there's been this funding in these different places, like to ULUI and to Envision, with maybe the thought that would be supportive of those efforts, but I don't think that's really shaken out. So we're hoping to maybe shepherd people into these resources into that direction through this coordination. Right?
So Marissa Mastrini, we're in our buffer before we have to leave for LPC, but are there, we have a homelessness update we need to give. It's just an update, not for discussion, just an update. But before we pivot off of this, are there any other thoughts that we're not doing that you wish we would do, or anything you would wish we would do more of? Anything burning on people's minds that you want to bring up?
Do you have the conferences scheduled this year?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yep. April 19th to the 21st.
If you have ideas about that, email Cam. I think that's the best way to handle it.
Yeah. So anybody online, any final thoughts?
For me to recover the fastest way to get to.
Exactly. So here's
I would follow Councilmember Bradshaw, but I think my car has the horsepower to keep up.
So
it's not a rocket ship,
So here's what we need at this point. Like, you've given us some good thoughts, and as the mayor said, if there are other things that come to mind, email us as soon as possible, because our plan in January is to come back to you and say, essentially, option one on dues would be to do the second round of rate increases that get to that 95%, which obviously gives us more bandwidth to do what you task us to do. Option two, this is what Nick's pulled up here on the screen, would be to not have that second round of dues increases, but to essentially allow the natural increase in the formula to take hold, and that would put us about 92 to 93% as opposed to the 95%. So we're asking from you right now is just to ratify the direction to bring you back these two concepts. If there are any other concepts you want us to bring forward, we can, you can say so now. Otherwise, we would take a motion to give us direction to prepare these to come back in January, as well as kind of laying out the we don't have to finalize the budget in January, but dues make up 2/3 of the budget.
So you're going to,
the sizable portion.
proposal is to bring back basically stay the same with the natural increase.
Yes.
And then another proposal that would be the first step of the two steps to get us.
No, part two, because we did part one last year.
Okay.
It'd be part two.
The the three rates of population, property value, and sales tax, it would be a second adjustment or increase to the sales tax rate. And we had that listed out in last year's memo. Included in your packet.
But that's why it's helpful for us to know if there are other things you want us to do. We want to know that now so we can come back with a realistic expectation of what we can do next year based on which dues proposal you proceed with.
Okay. Well, does anybody have any problem with seeing those two things next time? Hearing none, I think you've got your.
Let's do a quick motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
I
Favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay, perfect. We'll have that prepared for January. The last thing in the executive director report was an update from the Salt Lake County Conference of Mayors. We also have a document in there from the cities of the first and second class caucus meeting in November, where almost every city brought homelessness up in some form or fashion. Molly, do you want to just give this group an update?
Absolutely, yeah.
From the comm meeting?
Certainly. So last month at our last board meeting, we approved the principles that we're going to be looking at, and that's in the board packet. Since then, we've had a couple meetings with various stakeholders. As Cam mentioned, one was with the cities of the first and second class. Most of them brought up homelessness. And one thing that became apparent in that meeting is that we really need to get a better feel for the metrics. Again, to your point of what are the data points we can look at rather than just the anecdotes that we can look at, and what are cities actually doing. That point also came up in the Salt Lake County comm meeting for our shelter cities when we were having that discussion with them. One thing as staff and with the shelter cities we're trying to work on is how can we better understand what are the costs that a city may have because they are interacting with a homeless population versus what are the costs the city may have because they are hosting a homeless shelter. And so we are working with the big host cities, the big five, to better understand what those expenses are, right? So, for example, Midvale hires 9 officers to focus on working in and around their shelter exclusively, right? And so trying to understand.
And that's out of a total force of about 60 officers.
So about, yeah. So
55, I think.
Yeah. So, a huge portion of their public safety is dedicated to this shelter specifically. And so we are working with the cities. I've kind of discussed the mitigation fund, discussed the impacts of shelters to really try to better understand and delineate what is a shelter impact versus what is just a sense of just maybe having someone who's unhoused in your community and might need access to resources. So that's what we're working on right now. Hopefully we'll have a better understanding of that soon. And once we do, we will report that back to you.
And the last thing I'll add is you'll see Molly's memo in the board packet from the comm meeting. And one of the questions that's come up multiple times in the comm is basically the distribution of qualifying shelters that receive some state money from the mitigation fund. So that's what the second table is it identifies by county where those different qualifying shelters are. And one of the big takeaways here is when the mitigation fund was originally designed and implemented 5 years ago, there were only 5 qualifying shelters that were able to be eligible for those dollars. Then Vernal came on, that became the 6th, and more now qualify. This is in part why we went last year to get state money into the fund. So now you've got $5.5 million of local money and $5 million of state dollars. That being said, as we've been following up with the communities that have these qualifying shelters, the amount of money that they request from the mitigation fund versus the amount of need that they've articulated are quite different. So in the Midvale case, mentioned the 9 officers. This year, they're going to be close to offsetting their costs, but up until this year, they were usually running with a general fund subsidy of between $500,000 and $800,000. In Salt Lake City, they get $2.7 million from the mitigation fund, Last year, they estimated their costs related to the shelters at about $23 million. So that's why we're trying to get down to the metrics to figure out kind of how all these pieces fit together. And Wayne Niederhauser is talking about additional facilities of some type. And so that's why I wanted everyone to understand what the universe is right now of the qualifying facilities. And we've got meetings scheduled this week with Wayne and Representative Ellison. So we anticipate this will be another hot topic for this coming session, and probably a hot topic at the January board meeting. The last thing I'll add is that the cities in Salt Lake County, Midvale, Salt Lake, and South Salt Lake, and I think Mill Creek might be going with them, are planning to try to meet with the Conference of Mayors or equivalent in Utah and Davis counties in the next few weeks. So just those of you in those counties, stay tuned. They're going to be trying to come meet with you to talk about what they're facing in Salt Lake County and potential partnerships in Davis and Utah counties.
Good locations in Davis and Utah County for all that to move to.
So
Kidding.
just know that they want to have that conversation, and we want to give them space to have that conversation before we take additional positions here.
Is there, I mean, I noticed, I'm just thinking, you know, when they are building a shelter, or whether it's the one that you have, Mayor, in Midvale, or a regular shelter that can encompass all, the parameters that are put in place for the location. I mean, they are considering not only beds, but they have to consider law enforcement, they have to consider sanitation, food, water, transportation, next to a transportation hub, or what do we do? Is that all been documented, or so that as we go forward in these discussions, these are the parameters of what's needed to incorporate a shelter when it comes to Utah County? I just want to know what I'm going to tell my neighbors.
Say this is a moving target. It's a moving target to some extent. I mean, one of the issues that we had as mayors in Salt Lake County and trying to figure out a location for a temporary shelter, temporary overflow shelter, was proximity to resources, including transit and also treatment, and also the other buffers that are in the legislation, House Bill 440, that talk about proximity to certain kinds of things that raise questions about the appropriateness of a site, like proximity to schools, liquor stores, things like that.
Right.
And then so there's that, and that's also, like, I would say, informed by some experience, and it depends on the type of facility you're talking about. So in our case in Mill Creek, you know, there was a concern expressed about proximity to schools. There's actually an alternative school almost across the street from the facility that got chosen, but the hours of operation of the shelter are such that they don't interact with the school hours generally. So that's not so much necessarily a disqualifying thing, you know. And so anyway, the answer to your question is that's one of the things we're working on. And one of the things that in this process that we had to deal with this past year was trying to get some of the providers of services that operate the shelter or that serve the shelter to give us some better direction about, like, what kinds of things do need to be closed, and and then that's also affected by what the budget is too. Because a lot of these things can be solved if there's plenty of money, but not so much if you need to be closer to service providers if you don't have money to transport people. So anyway, it is definitely something that it's top of mind when we're looking at it, but I can't tell you that we have any definitive rules about that yet.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was just going to mention Salt Lake County is looking for people to help with their point in time census count that's coming up in January. And I think it's a great thing for elected officials to do. I've done it twice and it's been really interesting. And then also there's a Christmas meal for the homeless on Saturday morning at 11 in Salt Lake, if anybody's interested in that. But I think, you know, especially with this cold weather this week and stuff, it's important that we, you know, do what we can and realize what these people are going through. So.
Well, and I second what you say about the point in time count too, because when you are out doing that, you're interacting with people, and there's a set, you know, questions and information you're trying to gather from them, which also informs some of the criteria that we would be discussing, but you also get to learn about these people and something about their story, about how they got into the situation. And you also learn that they're not just from Salt Lake City or Jackson, Wyoming. They're from everywhere. They're from our state. They're from my town and your town and things like that. And
Issues too, that, like when President Niederhauser came, and he was talking about all of the different backgrounds, some situational, some chronic, and I think that's a distinction also when we look at shelters and family needs versus individual needs.
Well, and right now, the sad reality is there are insufficient beds for families, and there are insufficient beds for people who are experiencing mental health challenges, and just insufficient beds, period. And so we are implementing the principles you adopted last meeting. Well, we urge you to just read this summary from the Salt Lake Com, because the Salt Lake Conference of Mayors have spent significant time this year. Every meeting they've discussed these things. So they are well versed on homelessness. And what we want to do is kind of give you that update, make sure those of you in Utah and Davis County know that those mayors want to come chat with you in your counties. And stay tuned. We'll be meeting with Niederhauser this week. So motion to adjourn so we can get to LPC.
all right. I heard a motion by Cam, seconded by Connie. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.